Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Senior News Editor with Retail Insider. Joining me today is Jasmine Mara, who is Vice President of Bromwich and Smith. Thanks for joining us today, Jasmine.
Thanks for having me, Mario.
Well, let's talk about some disturbing numbers that have just come out regarding insolvencies and bankruptcies in Canada. Tell me what those numbers showed, the ones that came out for December.
Yeah, December was unfortunately not great news for Canadians. We're starting to see sort of the pressure of all the things happening in the economy. We saw that numbers were up 13%. It was exactly 13.8% higher than previous December. Starting to see all the things in the economy start to take hold and seeing it at everybody's kind of dinner table, if you will.
Yeah, and the same is happening with businesses as well, is it not?
Absolutely. In fact, businesses rose even faster than personal insolvency. We saw in December increase by 23.3% year over year. So really starting to see it come down on the corporate side as well.
Well, let's talk about those two separate areas. First of all, about the consumers. Why are we seeing insolvencies on the rise for consumers in Canada?
I think there's a lot of factors right now. But certainly everybody is very aware of what's happening with interest rates. I think, through the pandemic, the federal government made the decision to try and stimulate the economy by having lower interest rates, which was, of course, the right thing to do. But it did mean that consumers thought, hey, maybe I can take on a little bit more. Maybe I can get that bigger house, or, lending rates were just incredibly low historically. And so it allowed access to money, access to debt. And we didn't see the impact of what that really meant in cost for us. But of course, right now, coming out of that, both with credit card, lines of credit, loans, mortgages, etc., everything is costing a little bit more. And I would say not even a little bit, like a lot more on a monthly basis. We are starting to see a little bit of relief at sort of like the gas prices, but it's truly not offsetting that everyday cost for Canadians. And looking at the recent data with Equifax, we're carrying more debt than ever. Our average debt load is about $21,000, and that's not mortgage debt, so unsecured debt outside of our mortgage. And
Yeah.
so it can be very costly, not only just to maintain the interest, but to try and get out from underneath those debt payments.
What about for businesses? Why are we seeing a rise in that area?
Businesses are interesting. I think we saw a lot of folks through the pandemic, a lot of folks lost their jobs. We started to see an increase in self-employment for sure. But there was also CERB payments, not just the personal side, but for corporations, tax breaks, federal government support through that time period. And all of those, both for personal and corporate, are no longer available. And so, where does that leave us? We've got a really low unemployment rate, so it's hard to attract and retain employees. We're not necessarily making as much money because things are costing us more as organizations and corporations, whether it's manufacturing or otherwise, it's costing us as well. So I think, we're getting it from all sides, whether it's individuals and employees and or someone owning a company.
Now, when you're looking at, you mentioned the government supports, obviously, with no supports in place anymore
Mm-hmm.
for businesses and for consumers. Do you think in the past couple of years, those government supports kept people and businesses afloat for a while?
Oh, certainly. I really think so. One of the things that's been interesting for me working in insolvency is that there was this sort of thought that, oh, insolvencies must be rising amid the pandemic because, of course, things are difficult.
Yeah.
But actually, the opposite happened. We saw a record low number of insolvencies. And I think it was largely because we did have these supports from the federal government, whether it was CERB payments or corporate taxes. The other thing that happened was that, we sort of saw a little bit of a split for demographics. So low income frontline workers, women, seniors were adversely affected where, some people were able to maintain their job and be buoyant. And so the pandemic meant they actually saved money. So it sort of split the middle class a little bit more than we've seen in the past.
All right, and I guess it all comes down to debt, right?
Yes.
Whether it's you and me and the personal debt we have, or businesses, and the debt they take on, just through operating and in challenging times. What's the key, I guess, to dealing with debt?
Yeah, interesting question. I think, debt can be this neutral thing. We think of it as like a negative thing, but when we buy a house, we celebrate. We buy a new car, we celebrate. And so I think it's around, how do we manage that? And what does that look like, both for our monthly payments, and what is quote unquote good debt versus bad debt, right?
Yeah.
Certainly, our mortgage, obviously it is debt, but we take advantage of inflationary pressures there. And so our house can potentially go up over time. And so I think the key is really understanding your budget, understanding your income, understanding your expenses, and acknowledging if and when your expenses change, which I think is something we see a lot. Canadians, Calgarians, Albertans, we're very hopeful people, believe it or not. We like to believe if we lose our job that we're going to get a new one, or, and that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. But it does mean that sometimes we don't acknowledge our current circumstances and how we need to change maybe our lifestyle to address that.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Jasmine, just as we look into, we're 1 month plus into the new year, what are your thoughts of what we can expect when it comes to bankruptcies and insolvencies for both business and consumers this year?
Yeah. I wish I had better news, Mario, but I think, we are going to see, through the pandemic, there was sort of this discussion of we're going to have a wave of insolvencies. I'm not going to suggest there's this giant wave we can't handle, but I think we are going to see that slow creep back up to normal and then potentially surpass that. And so, what I would leave, your viewers with is, there is on average between 7,500 and 10,000 people a month that need to go insolvent. And insolvency is not, obviously it's something that's a last resort. You don't want to go bankrupt if you don't have to. But you're not alone if you're in that space. We're starting to see many people that are over 120 days late on their mortgage. That's when, companies start to foreclose. Everything is costing more, and debt in particular is. So I would just leave them with, you're not alone. Get help. Reach out to an expert. A licensed insolvency trustee are the only types of folks that can help you with this legislation. And, there is light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of people think about insolvency as scary, and certainly, it's got its elements. But I think what's more scary is not having a society that believes in second chances. Wow. And that's what insolvency is. It's a second chance. If you're in that space, if you've been caught up in those interest rates, or you've been caught up in that debt load, take action, get advice, get help, get prepared, know your rights, if you will, and then you can make an informed decision for you if you find yourself in that space.
All right. Thank you, Jasmine, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mario.
All right. That was Jasmine Mara, who is Vice President of Bromwich and Smith. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Senior News Editor with Retail Insider. Thanks for joining us today.